everyone. I am so excited to be here with you today. My name is Sarah Honore, and I am an HISD curriculum writer. This lesson is being recorded for HISD at home, and it is designed for middle school ELA students. That's English Language Arts. And our focus today is going to be on image analysis in a nonfiction text. We're going to start off with a quick write. As a teacher, I really like starting with quick writes because it's a great way to get your brain going, to get some of your thoughts and feelings out. And so today, because we are focusing on images, we're going to use an image for our quick write inspiration. And there are a couple of ways that you can interact with this image. I'm going to move the video up here to the top so you can see all the prompts. And there are 3 different ways you can interact with this. So for this, you can type on a laptop if that's what you have available. You can write on notebook paper. You can just type it out on a phone, whatever works best for you and whatever you have on hand. So first of all, you can choose anything in this image that inspires you and let that lead your thinking. You could also use this image as a jumping off point for a poem, a story, or a journal entry. And third, you could think about how you're getting creative with your free time while you're at home. So we see here a boy who's built himself some wings out of cardboard and paper towel tubes, and the shadow in the background looks like it's a rocket lifting off. He's clearly getting creative with what he has on hand. So how are you getting creative? Have you tried something new? Have you used your imagination? Maybe started a new hobby? So this is an opportunity to think about that and to write about it. And what I'm going to ask you to do is pause this video as you write, and then write for about 5 or 6 minutes. And then when you're done writing, you can go ahead and press play and restart the video. Once you've unpaused the video, you can put your pencil down. So for example, this is what I wrote during my quick write time. So I chose the third option. So how are you getting creative with your free time while you're at home? Have you tried something new? Have you used your imagination? And I wrote about having to get creative with entertaining my kids. I've got a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old, and they are used to going to playgrounds and parks and things like that. And when we can't do that, we have to find other ways to use our imaginations and to exercise and to stay busy. And so we're doing things like building forts out of cardboard boxes and doing neighborhood scavenger hunts. So I think we're all having to get a little bit creative with what we have on hand at home. The next thing we're going to do to sort of get our brains ready for the learning we're doing today is to think about what are some types of images that might appear in an article or essay. And so I would like you to take a minute and think of that question, and then you're going to pause the video and write down as many of those as you can think of. And when you are done, go ahead and press play. If you have pressed play, that means you have a list ready to go. Let's see if your list matches mine. So some of the images that you might encounter when you're reading a nonfiction text are as follows. You might see photographs. You might see charts and graphs, which are representations of data, numbers, statistics, things like that. You might see maps that show where something is located. You might see a diagram that points out the different parts of something. You might see a timeline, which shows you when things occurred across a span of time. And you might see illustrations or drawings. Any of these may appear in a nonfiction text. Did some of these match what you came up with? Today we're going to talk about how to analyze images when they appear in a nonfiction text. Just like with everything else in a text, authors choose images for specific purposes. They want to communicate something important. They want to give you additional information. They want to show you how something works. They want to show you where something is. Images are there to give us additional support as we read, and so it's important to pay attention to them as we're reading a nonfiction text. Our work today is going to center around 4 basic steps for analyzing an image. If you are a confident reader already, you may automatically be doing a lot of these things when you are encountering an image in a text, and that is okay. If you are somebody who is still a striving reader and you are practicing all the time, then these are steps that you may need to teach your brain to go through when you encounter an image. When skilled readers encounter an image in a text, they go through the following steps. The first thing you do, the first thing any of us do when we encounter an image is we just look at it. We take it in. We notice what people, places, things, colors, or symbols are in the picture. So you might make a list of those things if you know you're going to need to analyze an image. The second step is to think big. What are some big ideas present in the picture? Is this a picture that shows me something about war or friendship or love or happiness or nature? These are some big ideas that you might encounter in an image. Our third step is to think about facts. What are some facts the picture represents? Facts are going to be really obvious in things like a map or a timeline or a chart or a graph or a diagram. Facts can be a little bit more challenging when we see pictures, photographs, illustrations, but there are still facts to be found there. What do we notice? What is true in these images? And our last step is to think about purpose. Why might an author have chosen this image to go with their writing? What does the image have to do with what this article is about? What does the author want us to get from this image? And what does the author want us to better understand as a result of seeing this image? During the school year, you may have seen this document in your classroom. You may have used it to analyze images before. If you haven't, you'll notice it has these same 4 steps. They're just looking, listing what you notice, thinking big, thinking about facts, and thinking about purpose at the end. And so this is the process we're going to follow today as we look at some images and we analyze what we see. Some questions you might be asked about images look like the ones on the screen. You might see questions that start with the primary purpose of the diagram is to, or questions that start with things like the map is included in the selection most likely to. So when we're asking questions about images, really the purpose and the function of the image is that very last step, just like it is in our process. So after we think about everything in the image and what it has to do with the text, then we think about why it's there and what it's doing for us as a reader. For our model lesson today, we are going to use a text that you may remember if you did the book Head Heart lesson with Mr. Jackson previously. So we're going to be using the text called Learning Rewires the Brain. And this is in your textbook. If you are using the digital textbook, you can do a search for it. If you are using your physical textbook, you can find it in there as well. So I'm going to give you a second to pull that up. Go ahead and pause the video. And if you don't already have that text pulled up, I'm going to ask you to turn to it or to pull it up on your screen now. The first thing we're going to do before we look at the images in this text is we're going to review what we read. So take a moment to think about the main ideas from the text, Learning Rewires the Brain, from the book Head Heart lesson. If you didn't read this text in the book Head Heart lesson, preview it by looking at the title and subtitles. And we can also click background for an overview. I'm going to bring this up on the screen right now so that we can all look at it together. So if you have not previously read this, we can click on background. The background says, in this science article, the author reports a research finding that is truly life-changing, the discovery that as we learn, our brain cells undergo physical changes. This cause and effect process, much of which takes place as we sleep, helps us retain knowledge. So I can tell from this background information that this is going to be an informational article. It's going to teach me about how the brain works, how we learn, and what happens to our brain as a result of learning. And I'm pretty surprised to hear that a lot of this takes place as we sleep. That's pretty interesting. I'm going to make a prediction that probably a lot of the images in this article are going to be there specifically to help us understand some of these ideas. Brain science seems like a pretty complicated topic, and so I think probably a lot of these images are here to help me understand what's going on. At this point, you can either review what you've read before or skim through the rest of the article to notice the title and the subtitles and just get sort of an overview as needed. And you can pause the video if you would like in order to make that happen. When you're ready, move on to the next step, which is thinking about what we're going to be looking for as we skim back through this article. We're not going to fully read the whole article, especially if you've read it before. But if you haven't read it, we're going to read the first few paragraphs and get a feel for the content of the article, and then look at the images and think about how they contribute to our understanding of the topic. As we revisit this article and look at images, we are going to look and list as our first step. We are going to think big. We are going to think facts. And we are going to think purpose. If you are working with a physical copy of a book, feel free to annotate in there or in a notebook. If you are working with a digital copy, you can annotate directly in your textbook on the computer. And that's what I'm going to be doing to show you my thinking as we go. So I notice our first image here, before we even start reading the article, is this sort of spacey looking image. And I'm not sure exactly what this is, but with any image, you're going to want to check the caption because the caption always gives you important information. So here we have a caption that says, an artist's depiction of an electrical signal, yellow-orange regions, shooting down a nerve cell and then off to others in the brain. Learning strengthens the paths that these signals take, essentially wiring certain common paths through the brain. That is really interesting. So let's take another look at this image here before we jot down our thoughts. I am going to start by looking and listing. And some of the things I notice are connections between elements in the brain. I notice lights. I notice that it looks like a web. And if we're thinking big, I'm going to go back to one of the words that I used in my list. I noticed connections, and connection seems like a big deal. I'm also going to add knowledge based on our caption. Knowledge seems like a big idea in this image. I'm going to think facts, and for facts, let's reflect on the caption itself. The caption tells us that this is an artist's depiction, so we know that this is an illustration. This isn't a photograph, it's not a diagram because nothing's labeled, it's not a map or a timeline. Artist depiction means this is an illustration. This is an artist drawing of what this looks like. We know that this is an electrical signal, and that's what the lights are. That's interesting. And these are nerve cells and paths. And we know that learning strengthens these paths. Finally, we're going to think about purpose. Why might an author have included an artist's illustration of what these connections and pathways look like in this article? I think that because this seems like such a complicated topic and the author really wants us to understand what they're talking about, I think that having an illustration helps us to visualize what these connections really look like. These aren't things that we encounter on a daily basis. That's not something that you can just open up your head and look at. So providing an illustration helps me to visualize what is actually happening in there. And when the author talks about connections and pathways in the brain, what exactly the author means. And so I'm going to write down helps us to visualize something complicated and hard to see. We are now going to read a few chunks of this article just to get practice looking at other images and thinking about why they are there in the context of the article. If you have already read this article and are familiar with it, you can feel free to skip ahead to the parts where we talk about the pictures and annotate the pictures. If you're not familiar with the article, it can help us to analyze the picture in order to know what's going on around it in the context of the article. So I'll start here. Musicians, athletes, and quiz bowl champions all have one thing in common: training. Learning to play an instrument or a sport requires time and patience. It is all about steadily mastering new skills. The same is true when it comes to learning information, preparing for that quiz bowl, say, or studying for a big test. As teachers, coaches, and parents everywhere like to say, practice makes perfect. Doing something over and over again doesn't just make it easier, it actually changes the brain. This may not come as a surprise, but exactly how that process happens has long been a mystery. Scientists have known that the brain continues to develop throughout our teenage years, but these experts used to think that those changes stopped once the brain matured. No more. Recent data have been showing that the brain continues to change over the course of our lives. Cells grow. They form connections with new cells. Some stop talking to others. And it's not just nerve cells that shift and change as we learn. Other brain cells also get into the act. Scientists have begun unlocking these secrets of how we learn, not only in huge blocks of tissue, but even within individual cells. I'm going to scroll down because we have an image here. And this looks like to me some pictures of a brain. So if I'm going to look and list, I'm going to scroll down here until I get to a point where I can use my notes. There we go. Okay, list. What are some things that I see? I see some pictures of the brain from different angles. I see different colors on the brain. I see things like this. And so let's look up at the caption. Blood flow reveals activity in the brain. Here, blue highlights attention-related areas that had greater blood flow when people first learned a task. Blood flow decreased in those areas as they became more familiar with the task. Red areas became more active as the task was mastered, suggesting these regions may be associated with lower externally directed attention demands. That is really interesting. So I'm going to first think big. This is about brains. This is about learning. This is about learning new things. And now think facts. So what this caption tells me is that when we first learn a task, there's greater blood flow in certain areas of our brain. And then when we master the task and it becomes more automatic, the blood flow goes to a different part of our brain and different areas become active. So our brain understands when we're doing something new versus when we're doing something we've practiced a lot. That's interesting. So blood flow changes based on whether something is new or practiced. And another fact is that different areas of the brain are impacted differently by learning. That is something I did not know. That's an important fact. And so our last step is to think purpose. Why might an author have included this image in this article? How does this benefit me as the reader? I think one major purpose here is to prove the point that's being made. They're saying that the brain changes throughout our lives and it does different things depending on the activity that we're doing, but it's kind of hard to picture that. And so again, just like with the images of the neurons, this sort of helps us to visualize what the author's talking about, but also prove the point. Here is an image of the brain that shows us that this is true. So to prove that the author's point about brains changing and behaving differently is true. And I'm going to save that. We're going to skim through some other parts of the article and look at some other types of images that are used in this article. We won't read through the whole thing, but we're going to skip around and we're going to look at a couple of different things. Here's another illustration. And let's look at the captions. Chemical messengers called neurotransmitters leave the end of one nerve cell and jump across a gap to stimulate the next nerve cell. And you can see them jumping across the gap there. That's really interesting. And that's probably another image that the author included to help us visualize something that is so small that we'll never be able to see it in person. And there's one more image I want to make sure we see down here at the bottom. This is a diagram. So the title says Human Neuron Anatomy, and you'll notice that each of these little pieces is a label for the parts of the neuron here. So we've got the dendrite, the nucleus, and we've got another artist depiction. So this is both a diagram and an illustration, and this is an artist depiction of a nerve cell in the brain. So the cells are wrapping around the axon like a blanket, forming the myelin sheath. As people learn, brain cells change in ways that increase the speed and efficiency with which signals travel down the nerve cells. So we've got this included here first to educate us about what this looks like, but also to cement the point that brain cells are changing all the time and that we get better and better at things with practice because our brain is making new connections. That is pretty cool. We are going to move back to our presentation for just a moment. And what I would like you to do is I want you to think back on one of the images that you saw in the article and think about why the author might include that image in this article. I have shared my thinking about the images and you saw my notes as I annotated. Choose one of the images and complete the following stem. This image is included, most likely to. I would like you to pause the recording and jot down your thoughts in a complete sentence. And when you're ready, go ahead and press play. By now, you've had a chance to write your sentence. And so I'm going to show you mine. I chose to write about the diagram. This may be backwards on your screen. Don't worry, I'll read it aloud for you. I chose to write about the diagram that showed the different parts of the neuron. And my sentence was, the image is included most likely to illustrate the different parts of something very small so that we can see what it looks like. And I think that helps me as a reader because it looks like they were sharing a bunch of technical vocabulary and vocabulary I wasn't familiar with when it came to neurons and brain connections. And so having that diagram was probably really helpful for figuring out where exactly all this is on the neuron and how it works together. Now we're going to move into the independent practice portion. So if you are working with the digital version of your textbook, you can just do a quick search for this article, and it's called High School Teammates Carry On. If you are working with the physical copy of your textbook, it's on page 535 of your Pearson textbook. Also, if you have neither, if you don't have access to the digital version and you don't have the physical copy, you can do this exercise with any nonfiction text with images. You can use a magazine or a newspaper or anything like that. Anything would work for analyzing images. And you are going to take yourself through the same process that I modeled with the text about brains. So you are going to annotate the following things for each image. You are first going to look and list what you notice. You're going to think big. What big ideas are in this picture? Is this a picture about nature or about friendship or about family? Then you're going to look at the facts. What facts does this picture communicate? What information do we get from this picture or diagram or timeline or graph? And And finally, you are going to think about purpose. Why might the author have included this image in their article? Does it help us better understand something? Does it show us the different parts of something? Does it help us to see when an event happened in relationship to other events? Does it give us a way to easily understand complicated numbers or statistics or information? Does it show us a photograph of a place or a building to help us visualize what something is about? So as you read, keep all of these things in mind and annotate for the things you notice when you first look at it, your big ideas, your facts, and your purpose. Go ahead and pause the video as you read and then press play when you are ready to continue. Let's move on to our final step in the learning today. Just as we completed a sentence analyzing the image's purpose for our previous article, you are going to repeat that process for the article that you just read. Choose one of the images you saw in the article and think about why the author might have included that image. You are going to begin your response with the stem. The primary purpose of the image is to. Go ahead and pause the video for the last time while you record your sentence on your notebook or whatever you're using for your writing today. Thank you so much for your participation today. I want to close with a book talk. And the reason I want to close with a book talk and encourage you to keep reading at home, either with physical books that you have or with Mac and Via, is to go back to the article that we read about brains and how we get better and our brains rewire themselves as we get more practice with reading. So whether you are already a skilled reader or whether you are a striving reader that is looking to get better, the more you read, the more your brain rewires itself to become a better reader. The brain is an amazing thing. The book talk I want to do today is For the Last Kids on Earth. You can access this on Mac and Via, and I thought it was perfect to do a graphic novel book talk for today since we were focusing on images. So this is a graphic novel, kind of like Captain Underpants, if you were into that. And it's a really great book. It is by Max Brallier, and it is about Jack Sullivan, who is a kid who is living alone in his treehouse after the monster apocalypse. He's in there all by himself, and he's outfitted it with weapons to fight monsters with and all kinds of junk food that he loves. And he has to team up with his best friend, Quint, the school bully, Dirk, and his crush, June, as well as his pet monster, Rover, to battle the monsters and to try to keep his town safe and to try to keep his friends together. It's a really great book. It's really funny. They've made it into a Netflix series, but I recommend reading the book first, always, and I think you'll really like it. Again, you can access it on Mac and Via, and if you're not sure how to get onto Mac and Via, you can either download the app on a phone, and you get on there using your regular login information for school, or you can get on via the hub, and I'm going to show you that really quick. I'm just going to drag my screen over here, and mine might look a little different from yours, and that's okay. You will still have this purple toolbar up at the top, and so if I click on Digital Resources, it's going to take a minute. My Mac and Via is favorited because I use it all the time, but you can also search for it up here, or you can scroll down to Language Arts. When I click on this, it's going to ask me for my login, which is again is the same login information you use for Clever and all your other apps. And my Mac and Via screen, again, might look a little different from yours, but we have all the same books. So if you really like graphic novels, I got here by clicking on categories. If you really like graphic novels, we've got a whole section for you. If you want to learn about other things, we've got other sections and all kinds of books in here that I think, will really enjoy. Thanks so much for spending time with me today, and I hope you are safe and well. Have a great day and happy reading.